In 1986, the FBI became deeply alarmed when two of their critical Soviet assets, KGB agents Valery Martynov and Sergei Motorin, were suddenly compromised. Both have been lured back to Moscow and executed. And what better way to uncover the mole than by turning to its Soviet Analytical Unit, a division created to counter the relentless espionage of the Cold War. The unit's supervisor was 44-year-old Robert Hanssen. He was assigned to catch the mole. What the FBI didn't realize was that the mole they were hunting was Hanssen himself. This was real old-fashioned spying. He'd leave his house in the Washington, D.C. suburb of Vienna, Virginia, and drive the close distance to the nearby park, Foxstone Park, about 3 minutes away. He'd walk to a footbridge within the park and drop off a plastic garbage bag containing top-secret documents or floppy disks. Afterward, he'd leave a piece of tape vertically on a signpost at the park's entrance, making it clearly visible to the KGB agent driving by and looking for the signal. The agent would then collect the files, drop off the money, and place a horizontal piece of tape on the same signpost to confirm the exchange. For 22 years, Robert Hanssen spied for the Soviet Union and then Russia after its collapse. He handed over 6,000 pages of classified documents harboring the agency's greatest secrets, sending Soviet spies who had agreed to work for America to their deaths in exchange for $600,000 in cash and diamonds. His 88-year-old mother was shocked when she found out he had been arrested. She said he had a happy childhood, but actually his childhood was far from happy. Robert Hanssen's father, a police officer, was physically and emotionally abusive. His father would roll him up inside a carpet or a military-style mattress, pinning his arms so he couldn't move. He'd spin Robert around until he became so dizzy he threw up, claiming it was to toughen him up. As a teenager, his father secretly arranged for him to fail his driving test, further undermining his confidence. Even on his wedding day, his dad told his bride, Bonnie, that she was marrying a loser. After studying accounting and getting an MBA at Northwestern University, Robert actually followed in his father's footsteps, joining the Chicago Police Department in 1972. He was assigned to a unit investigating police corruption, his first dabble in intelligence. 3 years later, in January 1976, he left to pursue a new path and was sworn in as a special agent of the FBI. Although he was never a field agent, Hanssen worked in diverse roles including white-collar crime and accounting within the criminal division in New York. In March 1979, he landed the role he had long desired, counterintelligence. He was responsible for building national databases to track Soviet operatives, compiling extensive profiles on spies from the KGB and the GRU, the Soviet Union's military intelligence agency. Soon after transferring to the division, he started spying for the Soviets. The Soviets didn't approach him. He literally walked into the Manhattan office of the Soviet commercial trading agency Armtorg that served as a front for the GRU. He soon gave away the identity of the most vital U.S. asset inside the GRU, codenamed Top Hat, Dmitry Polyakov. For 17 years, Polyakov had been passing secrets to the U.S., including critical intelligence on Soviet strategic missiles and nuclear strategy. Despite Hanssen's betrayal, the GRU didn't immediately act on his information. It wasn't until 6 years later, when CIA mole Aldrich Ames also exposed Polyakov, that the Soviets arrested him. However, the Soviets would take his information very seriously later on. By 1981, he had moved to FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. to work in the budget unit of the Intelligence Division. This position gave him insight into all of the FBI's intelligence and counterintelligence operations, including how resources were allocated. He worked on developing and refining surveillance tools and became an expert on polygraphs, even pursuing the FBI not to expand their use, which later protected him. He was appreciated for his computer skills, but not for his social skills. In David Wise's book, Spy, about Robert Hanssen's betrayal, a former colleague described him as someone who lived in the shadows. He was the last person in the world to say, "Let's have a drink with." 2 years later, in 1983, he transferred to the FBI's Soviet Analytical Unit. As a supervisory special agent, he studied the espionage activities of KGB and GRU agents operating in the United States. The FBI and CIA had recently made 2 significant recruits. Lieutenant Colonel Valery Martynov joined the Soviet embassy in Washington in 1980 and later agreed to work as a double agent for the US. He was motivated not only by money, but by the excitement of espionage and the belief that America was not the enemy. Around the same time, the FBI and CIA also recruited another KGB officer, Sergei Motorin. They leveraged his personal troubles, cheating on his wife with a prostitute, to gain cooperation. Motorin provided invaluable intelligence, including a comprehensive list of every KGB agent in the Soviet embassy. To protect the two double agents, the FBI assigned them code names. But it didn't take long for Hanssen, who had access to their debriefings, to figure out their real identities. Hanssen also uncovered the identity of another KGB officer turned American asset, Boris Yuzhin. The Soviets were already suspicious of Yuzhin when a janitor found a spy camera disguised as a cigarette lighter at the Soviet consulate in San Francisco. Since Yuzhin was a smoker, the KGB assumed it was his, and they were right. In 1985, Hanssen wrote a letter to the KGB's chief of counterintelligence at the Soviet embassy. Dear Mr. Cherkashin, soon I will send a box of documents to KGB officer Mr. Degtyar. They are from certain of the most sensitive and highly compartmented projects of the U.S. intelligence community. I believe they are sufficient to justify a $100,000 payment to me. I warn that Mr. Boris Yuzhin, Mr. Sergei Motorin, and Mr. Valery Martinov have been recruited by our special services. Unbeknownst to Hanssen, CIA mole Aldrich Ames had already revealed the identities of all three men 4 months earlier. Hanssen's letter, however, served as a double confirmation for the Soviets, reinforcing the credibility of the information. Motorin and Martinov were executed. Yuzhin was sentenced to a labor camp. Hanssen then sent instructions to the KGB on how to pay him and how they should communicate going forward, using dead drops in parks and pieces of tape on signposts as signals. Robert Hanssen was full of contradictions. By day, he worked tirelessly to protect America from Soviet espionage, even creating software to help the FBI track the movements of Soviet diplomats and personnel more efficiently. By night, he gave away America's most sensitive secrets to the very Russians he denounced as godless. Ironic for a man who was a devout Catholic, attending church nearly every day and spending Sundays there with his wife and their 6 children. He reportedly confessed his espionage activities to a priest, knowing the sanctity of the confessional would keep him safe. Yet he kept on sinning. In 1988, he handed over more than 530 pages of documents, such as a study conducted by the FBI on Soviet penetrations of the Bureau that he personally directed. He revealed the identities of Soviets the FBI had attempted to recruit. When Moscow wanted to find out how much the Americans knew about Soviet missile capabilities, they turned to Hanssen, who provided them with a detailed assessment. One of his most famous betrayals came in February 1989, when he disclosed a secret FBI and NSA operation, a tunnel built beneath the new Soviet embassy in Washington, which allowed the U.S. to eavesdrop on Soviet communications. The FBI had bought a townhouse nearby that served as the entrance to the tunnel, which cost hundreds of millions of dollars and was ultimately useless because of Hanssen's betrayal. Author David Wise aptly observed, perhaps it was fitting that a spy tunnel was betrayed by a mole, a creature that burrows underground. The KGB was grateful for his information, and although they didn't know his identity, as Hanssen never revealed it, they knew he craved a feeling of importance, so they flattered him in letters. We also acknowledge again your superb sense of humor and your sharp as a razor mind. We highly appreciate both. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Hanssen temporarily broke off contact with his KGB handlers. The turmoil in the region seemed to reflect Hanssen's increasingly erratic behavior. In 1993, he physically assaulted a subordinate, Kimberly Lichtenberg, dragging her by the arm and screaming at her after she tried to leave a meeting early. The incident left her with serious injuries, and Hanssen received only a 5-day suspension. He also attempted to approach a GRU officer in the garage of his apartment building with information about America's double agents, only to spook the GRU officer, who thought it was a trap and complained to the U.S. State Department. Despite his odd behavior, he was never suspected of being a mole, but that would change. The arrest of Aldrich Ames, the CIA officer charged with spying for the Soviets in 1994, failed to explain the devastating losses suffered by U.S. intelligence. The FBI and CIA believed another mole had to exist. The case of Felix Bloch fueled this speculation. Bloch was a U.S. State Department official suspected of selling secrets to the Soviets. While stationed in Vienna, he began seeing a prostitute frequently, which his foreign service salary couldn't realistically support. In 1989, Hanssen tipped off the KGB that Bloch was under surveillance. The KGB agent who had been meeting with Bloch abruptly cut ties, telling Bloch over a phone call secretly recorded by the FBI. A contagious disease is suspected. The sudden break with the Soviets alarmed the FBI. Since Ames had no access to the FBI's investigation into Bloch, someone else must have tipped off the KGB. Even when the hunt led to the arrest of FBI agent Earl Edwin Pitts, who was spying for the Russians, there were individuals in the agency who suspected another mole. Special Agent Thomas Kimmel remained convinced there had to be another, because the Russians hadn't asked for much information from Pitts. Plus, Pitts hadn't known about the tunnel under the Russian embassy. The FBI and CIA began targeting former KGB officers, now known as SVR officers after the Soviet Union's collapse, who had worked in the US during the years when America was losing its best assets. They offered up to $1 million for information, but didn't get any significant leads. The investigation mistakenly suspected CIA officer Brian Kelly, putting him through 2 years of hell and uncertainty with death penalty charges looming over him. It wasn't until 2000 that they zeroed in on the real culprit. The breakthrough came when the FBI focused on a retired KGB officer who had worked in Washington and was now in private business in Moscow. To lure him out of Russia, the FBI collaborated with an American corporation to invite him to a fake business meeting in New York. During the meeting, the KGB officer, whose identity remains anonymous, revealed he had kept a copy of the KGB's mole file as insurance for himself when he left intelligence work. The FBI agreed to pay him $7 million for his secrets. Although the file didn't include the name of the American mole, since Hanssen never revealed his identity, it was a treasure trove of information. Among the evidence was a recorded conversation between a KGB agent and the mole. When FBI counterintelligence agent Michael Wagespack listened to the tape, he recognized the voice but couldn't immediately put a name to it. Another clue came from the file's reference to a quote attributed to legendary U.S. Army General George Patton. "Let's get this over with so we can kick the shit out of the purple-pissing Japanese." FBI analyst Bob King, who had previously worked with Hanssen, recalled him using the phrase "purple pissing" and said, "I think that is Bob Hanssen." Wagespack listened again, and this time made the connection, exclaiming, "My God, that's him." The most damning piece of evidence in the mole file was a black plastic trash bag Hanssen had used to drop off the classified documents. His fingerprints were found on the inner layer. The FBI now had overwhelming evidence on Hanssen, but catching him in the act would be crucial to ensuring a conviction. So they devised an elaborate trap. They offered Hanssen a fake promotion to the Senior Executive Service, an exclusive tier of federal government positions with higher pay. Hanssen accepted, and in January 2001, he moved into a small office on the 9th floor of FBI headquarters. The office had been secretly equipped with a hidden camera and microphones, and his phones at work and at home were tapped. To monitor his movements at all times, the FBI even purchased a house across the street from Hanssen's home in Virginia. Hanssen was also assigned an assistant, Eric O'Neill, who had been tasked with keeping tabs on him. By February 2001, the investigation involved over 300 agents, tracking Hanssen from the moment he left his house to the moment he returned. When the FBI secretly searched his car, they found thumbtacks and chalk in the glove compartment, possibly used for signaling with Russian agents. Hanssen began to suspect that something was up because he still hadn't been given any meaningful work despite his so-called promotion. He also no longer had access to any top-secret information. Out of caution, he wrote a letter to the SVR to say that he was lying low for now. "Dear friends, I thank you for your assistance these many years. It seems, however, that my greatest utility to you has come to an end, and it is time to seclude myself from active service. I believe I have detected repeated bursting radio signal emanations from my vehicle. Something has aroused the sleeping tiger. I will be in contact next year, same time, same place. Your friend, Ramon Garcia," one of the aliases he used. The FBI learned that Hanssen was planning to drop off a package at Foxtone Park on February 18, 2001, based on a letter he had sent the previous year to the SVR specifying that the site would be used once a year. On that day, he arrived at the park at 4:34 p.m. and dropped off classified materials by the footbridge as usual. When he returned to his car minutes later, FBI agents, some carrying automatic weapons, surrounded him. As he was taken into custody, one of the case agents told him, "Bob, this is a sad day for all of us." Hanssen replied, "Life has its ups and downs." On July 6, 2001, Robert Hanssen pled guilty to 15 counts of espionage. Before sentencing, he read a note in court. "I apologize for my behavior. I am shamed by it. I have opened the door for calumny against my totally innocent wife and children. I have hurt so many deeply." He betrayed his wife Bonnie by continuing to pass secrets to the Russians after she caught him once and he promised to stop. And then he betrayed her in a deeply personal way. Without her knowledge, he encouraged his best friend, retired Army officer Jack Hoschauer, to secretly watch them having sex. He even plotted to drug Bonnie so his friend could father a child with her, according to David Wise's book. When the truth finally came out, a stunned Bonnie reportedly said to her sister, "My husband is a traitor and a pervert." Robert Hanssen spent the rest of his life in a supermax prison in Colorado with no possibility of parole. On June 5, 2023, he was found dead in his jail cell at the age of 79. The cause of death was colon cancer. Why did he do it? What was his motivation? According to Dr. David Charney, a psychiatrist hired by Hanssen's defense attorney to evaluate him, Robert Hanssen was partly motivated by desire to prove his worth to his wife, using the money to feel less like a failure. Dr. Charney told author David Wise, "Men are burdened by masculine pride. If our wife thinks we are a loser, that is intolerable." But money alone doesn't explain everything. Hanssen acknowledged this himself in a letter to the KGB. "As far as the funds are concerned, I have little need or utility for more than the 100,000. Dr. Charney believes Hanssen's main motivation for spying stemmed from deep-seated anger toward his father, an anger so intense that Hanssen described it as the cork coming out of the bottle when he spied. As Dr. Charney explains, troubled relationships with the father will affect their thinking for the rest of their life. Thanks for watching. For Newsthink, I'm Cindy Pom.